Hello everyone, my name is Ivo and welcome to Cooking with the Coias. Glad you could join me because on today's episode we are going to make an amazing sourdough bread. And thanks to Ken Forkish and his book on flour, water, salt, and yeast, I've been able to use one of his recipes and just modify it a bit, of course, to come up with my version of a sourdough bread that comes out absolutely perfect each and every time. I'm going to share it with you today. Okay. We don't use any commercial yeast. Sourdough bread is made 100% using Sourdough Starter. This is my Sourdough Starter. You can see this jar's been around for a bit. This Sourdough Starter is 1 year old already and counting. I took it out of the refrigerator and what I did was I put 75 grams. Yes, I measured it. You've got to have a weigh scale. So important to have a weigh scale in the kitchen. They're not expensive, but they are very, very valuable. So I've got 75 grams of my sourdough starter that I just took out of the refrigerator and put it in this jar. 75 grams. I measured 75 grams of flour. I'm just using regular white flour. I like to use unbleached flour, unbleached white, but any regular white flour will do. So that's 75 grams of white flour. And then I've also measured out and weighed 75 grams of water. Just room temp tap water. That's it. Okay, now all we do is we mix those three ingredients together. Okay, there we go. That's perfect. You can see the consistency there of the starter. We're just going to put this elastic around as a marker and we will show you, because we're going to let this sit, we're going to let it sit for 9 hours. And then 9 hours later, you'll be able to see the difference on how it's risen based on that elastic. So I'm going to put a piece of plastic wrap over top, and we're just going to let that sit, like I say, for 9 hours. And in the meanwhile, my mother yeast, which I've had for a year, is going to get covered, a piece of plastic and an elastic, and this jar goes right back in the refrigerator and it's going to stay there until I need it again. And if you've never made your own sourdough starter, I'm going to show you next week how to make your own sourdough starter, and you'll have your own that you could use each and every time. So it's actually been closer to 9.5 hours. That's because I had a bit of a late dinner, but that's still okay. So my yeast, I'm going to show you the yeast starter. But before I do that, what we want to do is we want to prepare some flour. Now, if you have strong flour, otherwise known as best for bread flour or Manitoba flour, the best for bread flour has higher glutens, higher protein, is better for bread. But if you don't have that, just use regular white flour. So I've used 804 grams of unbleached white flour, and I've added to that 50 grams of rye flour and 26 grams of whole wheat flour. So I'm just going to mix those three flours together. We are going to add, normally most recipes call for water. I personally have learned I substitute milk for water. So what I have here is 684 grams that I measured out of skim milk, otherwise known as 0% milk. You could use 1%, 2%, homogenized milk. You could use any milk you want, almond milk, whatever you prefer. But what I found is skim milk, i.e. 0% milk, works fantastic when it comes to bread. In fact, you might have seen me use the skim milk on my artisan bread, my simple overnight bread recipe. And if you haven't seen that recipe, I'll put a link here for you. You could check it out. So this, I've taken my temperature gauge. It's 90 degrees, and that's what you want, 90 degrees. So what I did is I took the 684 grams of milk, I put it in the microwave for 1.5 minutes, and it comes out at about 90 degrees. So every microwave is different, but I've added that to my flour. And now what I do is you just want to incorporate it and get it all mixed together. You don't want to knead it or anything like that. You just mix all the ingredients together. In fact, here, I'll even lift this up a bit. And you want to get it all incorporated and get all that flour absorbed into the milk. And once we do that, it's called an autolyse method. We're going to let this sit for 20 to 30 minutes just on its own without doing anything else. So I'm just using a very firm spatula here.
Okay, so it's pretty much, I've got some on the side here. We're going to scrape that off. Okay, so it's basically all incorporated, you can see there. So I'm going to cover it, and it's going to relax for 20 to 30 minutes. In the meanwhile, I would like to show you our starter dough. Take a look at this. You remember the elastic we put on? We'll check that out. So you can see there, it has really, really risen. So again, there's no yeast here. This is just my own starter, sourdough starter, which we fed, as you saw earlier, 9.5 hours ago. And now it's basically tripled in volume. That is going to be the yeast that we use in our sourdough recipe. It's been just over 20 minutes right now. Now comes the fun part. This autolyse method really is important when it comes to bread making. It helps with the rise, it helps with the structure, it helps with the flavor. It's a really good technique, so it's worth it the 20 minutes to 30 minutes to let it sit on its own. And now what I'm going to do, I've got 22 grams of salt that I measured out. Again, I weighed it. 22 grams of salt that we're going to add to our dough. Now we get to use our magic. That is beautiful. Look at that. Isn't that something? Okay. Now we're going to add our sourdough starter. And this is where you need to get your hands. You're going to incorporate the salt and the sourdough starter into the dough that we have put together with that mix of 3 different flours. Okay, so now it's time to get our hands in there. Hands are clean, and they say, you know, it's recommended that as you're mixing, you can keep your hands wet and then always keep them wet so it doesn't stick. But what I found is you're constantly wetting your hands. You might as well, just as well, get your hands in there, start mixing. It's gonna stick, it's no problem. Your hands are clean, so you're good to go. So if you can see here, what you do is you grab the dough and you pinch it. It's called the pincer method. You see there, you just kind of squeeze it and pinch it. And then turn it around and do it again. And you're gonna continue to do this. You'll be able to tell when you feel that your sourdough starter is mixed in nicely with the dough. Because it's a little more, let's say, liquidy than your dough is. So it'll start to dry up once it's all mixed together. Okay, so now I can tell that it's mixed in very, very nicely. And you know my expression, everybody knows it. When you think you've mixed enough, mix some more. Because we want to make sure that salt is all incorporated and that nice sourdough starter, which by the way smells really, really good, that everything is all incorporated into the dough. Alrighty, there we have it. And like I said, it's going to stick to your hand, so don't worry about it. That's what the spatula is for. We're going to let it sit. And during the first hour, what we're going to do is we're going to do 3 what they call folds. And I'll show you what the folds are within the first hour. And then we're going to do a 4th fold sometime afterward. Usually within the 2nd hour, I like to do the 4th fold. So there's a total of 4 folds total that's going to happen. And then just before I cover it, I just like to make sure I scrape the edges down. Just get all of that, get all the dough off the sides as much as you can. So there's our dough right there. We're going to cover that up. I'm going to put some plastic over it. And then I will, after I put the plastic on, I'll cover it. And then we'll see it again in about 20 minutes. So it's been about 20 minutes. Time to do the first fold. All right. So as you can see, I put a little bit of plastic over it as well. And there's our dough. And what I like to do is not necessarily get my hands soaking wet, but damp, just a little bit damp so the dough doesn't stick. And then basically all you're going to do is get a hold of the side of the dough, lift it up and fold it over. Turn it, lift it up and fold it over. Turn it, lift it up and fold it over. Turn it, lift it up, fold it over. That's a 4-fold. Now I like to continue doing that 4-fold for about a minute or at least 20 times. All you have to do, just to be clear, all you have to do is 4. But I like to do a little bit more. Again, just my own personal preference. And as you're doing this, what happens is the gluten start to form, and as you move along, you'll feel the dough start to firm up really, really nicely and start to develop really, really nicely. We're going to cover it back up, and in 20 minutes time, we're going to do that again. In another 20 minutes, time for the second fold. Again, I'm just going to damp my hand a bit. You can see the dough still looking about the same. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4. That's really all we need. But like I said before, I like to do a little more. And you can see your hand, it doesn't stick as much. The more you do these folds, the less sticking that occurs. And sometimes I'll even lift it right up and fold it right over. You could see how it's starting to, how the dough is starting to firm up. And that's what you want. You want to get those glutens going and get this dough really working. You can see now it's even getting tighter. It's not even stretching as much. And that's when you know that it's time for a rest. So another 20 minutes, time for another fold. So this will be our third fold now within an hour. We did it every 20 minutes. And it's recommended to do 3 folds within the first hour, which really helps with the glutens. Again, I'm just going to dampen my hand just a bit. You can see the dough, how it's firmed up nicely. And again, we're going to just grab it and pull it over. Grab it and pull it over. Turn it around, grab it and pull it over. You know, back in the day when I think about they used to knead bread for long periods of time, now all we have to do is a 4-fold and we're done. So I do a little more than 4 times, but still it's relatively easy when you really think about it. We've done that 3 times now within the first hour. So now we can let this rest, and I'll give it maybe any time within the next hour. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the next 20 minutes, but any time within the next hour, I'll give it another 4-fold. Okay, so it's been about an hour thereabouts, and it's time to do our last fold for the evening before we let it rest. So again, just a little dampness on the hand. You can see our dough right there. And again, we're going to do that 1, 2, 3, and 4. But as I mentioned, I like to continue. So I'm going to continue a little bit more, and it'll be the last time that we're doing it. So once I'm done doing this, I'm going to cover it up, and then we let it sit for another 12 hours. As I mentioned, it's 12 to 15 from the time that we did the mixing, and that was a couple hours ago. So I'll probably let it go about 12 hours from now. And tomorrow morning, we'll go to the next step. And I'm going to show you in the morning, when we come back to this, the magic that our sourdough yeast starter has done to this particular dough. It's just kind of sitting in the middle of the bowl. I want you to remember that, because tomorrow morning, after 12 hours, I'm going to reveal this, and we're going to see exactly the magic of our sourdough starter. So I will leave this. You could leave this on the counter for the next 12 hours, or if you want, you can put it in the stove, put it in the oven in the stove. You want to keep it a little warmer, perfectly fine. But on the counter is also perfectly fine. So I will leave it there, and we will revisit it again in 12 hours and take a look at the magic. Oh, it's been about 14 hours or so since we mixed our dough. So let's take a look and see what we've got. Okay, it didn't rise as much as it has at other times. It looks like it's about doubled in size. But I'm going to show you here. I'll just take this plastic off, and that's probably because it was a bit cold in the house last night. But you could see that definitely the difference. There was a lot of empty space in around the dough yesterday, and now it's filled in that space and it's risen. So it's about doubled in size. But honestly, when the weather is warmer, this thing could actually rise right to the top of the plastic and fill this entire bowl. It's absolutely amazing. Okay, so what we're going to do now, it's time to we got to shape our dough. So I'm going to take a little bit of flour and just flour the surface here, just so it doesn't stick.
Okay, and then with my spatula, I like to slowly work the dough and just unstick it from the bowl and let it fall slowly onto my floured surface. There we go. Perfect. And we're left with a relatively clean bowl. A little bit of flour. What we're going to do is cut this in half. So I've got my dough cutter here, and you can just eyeball it. This one looks a little smaller than that one. Maybe I'll just add a little more to that one. Okay, so they're about roughly half. Now what we do is we do another one of those 4 folds. Take the dough, one end, do the side, lift and fold, and the side, lift and fold. That's it. And now I'm going to turn it over and we're going to shape it. And in order to shape it, what I like to do is put it on a relatively dry surface and take the dough ball and just kind of pull it towards you. Turn it and pull it towards you. And what happens, because you're doing it on a dry surface, the front of the ball, of the dough ball, is actually gripping the surface and it's tightening as you roll it towards you. So I'm just going to do that a few times. You want it to be, you know, like a medium tight. And you're going to see some air pockets here. There's air bubbles here. Try not to lose those air bubbles as you're shaping your dough. Okay. Now there's one. That's pretty good. That's getting relatively tight. Absolutely perfect. Now what I do, I take a cutting board, a plastic cutting board, and I'm going to put this on the board, but I don't want it to stick to the board. So you could put a little bit of flour on here, but what I found is if you put your dough on a cutting board with flour, sometimes it just absorbs the flour and it sticks to your board. So what I do, believe it or not, I use one of my cereal. I use shredded wheat. I take my shredded wheat and I break it up, or I keep the shredded wheat that's found on the bottom of your cereal when you're done. All these little bits of shredded wheat. And I like it because if you look at the ingredients in the box, all it says is wheat. So there's no sugar, there's no salt, it's just wheat. So I take the wheat, the little bits of wheat, and this is going to prevent my sourdough bread from sticking to the board. And it's also going to give texture to the top of my bread. So that just sits right on there like that. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to cover that. And that is going to sit now for 4 hours. Okay, and I do the same thing to my other dough ball. We're going to do 1, 2, the one side, 3, and 4. Little flour on the hands, and then roll it towards you. Now, another thing you can use, which is very, very effective, is just oatmeal. You could take oatmeal and just sprinkle oatmeal on your cutting board, and it will do the exact same thing. It'll keep it from sticking, and it'll also add great texture. So 4 hours they have to sit, and that's important because it's got a proof. It needs that proofing time, and 4 hours is ideal. It gives me a chance to clean up here a bit. So what it means is I'm going to have to preheat the oven at about 3.5 hours. 3 hour and 15 minutes. So after about 3 hour and 15 minutes, 3.5 hours, time to preheat the oven, because you want the oven ready in 4 hours to take the bread. You don't want to overproof it. You don't want to underproof it. Okay, so it's coming up to almost 3.5 hours. So what I've done is I've started the oven. I'm preheating it to 475. Now in the oven, I'm going to put my Dutch ovens. I have 2 empty Dutch ovens, and that's what you want when you're baking bread. You want something that's oven friendly, that will take the heat, and also with a lid on it. And I found these Dutch ovens do a phenomenal job at baking bread. So as the oven preheats, so are the Dutch ovens. There's 1, there's 2. Okay,
So we got about 35 more minutes. That's going to preheat for 35 minutes. That'll bring us to the 4-hour mark. And then it's time to start baking our sourdough bread. Okay, the oven is now preheated. It is time. Let's take these Dutch ovens out. They're piping hot. So oven mitts are definitely required. Lift that off. So we've got our sourdough. I got one here. Actually, I'm going to get a pair of scissors because what I like to do is cut an X on the top of the dough. It helps the bread rise and adds for great character. So you're going to see here how easily this comes off now, and I just plop it into, I don't want it touching the edge, there we go. I just plop it into the Dutch oven, and then with a pair of scissors I go down about 1/2 inch and I make an X on the top. Okay, it's that one. And now I'll do the same with this one. Take our dough, we're going to give it a flip. See how it comes off easily because of that shredded wheat that we put on there, or like I said, you can also use oatmeal, and it comes off really, really nicely. And then when this bakes, it's going to add some nice character and texture to the top. There we go. Lids go on, they go back in the oven, again at 475, and they're going to stay in the oven for 30 minutes with the lid on. So in the oven it goes. There goes our timer. Okay, let's dismiss that and let's go. Let's do 6 minutes. 5:55, 6 minutes. Okay, now the lid's got to come off now. So after 30 minutes, the lids come off. Oh boy. Oh wow. I'll show you this one. Look at that. It rolls very nicely. It's got some nice color to it. You think they're done, but they're not done. They got to get darker. They're just light brown. I want them to get that nice dark brown color, almost on the cusp of burning. And every oven and every stove is different. So I'm going to go 6 minutes here on mine, and then I'm going to take a look at them. If I want to leave it for another minute or two, I'll do so, but if not, I'll take it out. So with your oven, just start looking maybe after 5 minutes, look at 6, look at 7. You don't want it to burn. Some ovens might even take up to 10, 15 minutes depending on your oven. But what I found for mine, ½ hour with the lid on and about 6 minutes, 7 minutes max with the lid off. Okay, just a few more seconds, and a lot of people might have taken them out already, but I like mine just a little bit darker. All right, let's stop it and let's take a look. Oh yeah, that's very, very nice. And so is that one. The one that's, you gotta check these out. Okay, look at this beautiful sourdough bread right there. Isn't that something? Look at the rise on it. Perfect. Even though it didn't rise a lot initially. And the bottom, I like it. It's not burnt, but it's dark. So that one, and you remember the other one was a little smaller. So this one, because it's smaller, look at that. The top crisped up just a little bit more. Isn't that nice? Absolutely beautiful. That is a beautiful, beautiful sourdough bread. And amazing to think that we made this without any yeast, using our own yeast, which was our sourdough starter. It's tempting to cut into them right now, but you gotta let them sit. Let them sit for 15 to 30 minutes. They'll still be warm, but what's happening is the crust is developing, and I'll slice into one and I'll show you what it looks like inside. Okay, and someone smelled the bread cooking, of course. My lovely wife, Laura, finally made it up. You're finished sewing now?
Yes.
Finished sewing for the day. Okay. So look at this beautiful bread, sourdough. Mm-hmm. Now, I also wanted to mention, remember the shredded wheat I used? Look at the texture on the top of that bread. And then you remember how I cut the X with the scissors about a ½ inch deep? That makes the nice crown. Listen to that. But I want to show, look at the air pockets. That's what I want to see, the air pockets. at nice bubbly air pockets, which shows, that's the piece I want.
Oh, okay.
You could have this piece. Beautiful, beautiful air pockets in this bread. Look at that. That is,
Look, you can just see this.
that's spectacular. And the other thing what I wanted to mention, oh, I can see the steam still coming from the bread. Not only the air pockets, but you noticed how I used the milk. The milk makes for a great crumb. The crumb is this doughy part, and it has this a fantastic texture. There you go.
Thank you.
The milk is another key to making a good bread. I've got some olive oil here, but and you got that a little bit of sourdough taste, just a bit, but the bread itself is absolutely spectacular. No yeast, a little bit of olive oil.
Cheese and wine, and we're all set.
The other thing the milk does, if I didn't mention, it makes for a thicker crust. If I would have used water, like the recipe calls for, we would have got a thinner crust, crispy but thinner. This is still crispy, but it's thicker. You get a thicker crust and a better crumb using, in my case, skim milk, which is 0%. So, we're gonna enjoy this tonight with our dinner. It's kind of hard to stop eating it right now, but we gotta be patient. We'll have it with our dinner. But honestly, if you give this recipe a try, let me know how you made out with your recipe. Drop me a comment, or if you have a different way or some other trick or tip, by all means, share it with us. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, good luck and bon appetit.
Bye now.